Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I often joke that as an impact investor, the one thing we all have in common is that none of us can explain to our families what we do for a living when we go home for Thanksgiving. So it's really great to be here with all of you because even though I can't bring you home in a few weeks, I'm really excited to know that I'm in a room tonight where when you hear that I work for the Nonprofit Finance Fund, you guys are going to say, wow, that's cool. Let me hear more about that. As opposed to most people who would say, that's crazy. You can't combine nonprofit and finance. That makes no sense. So as an impact investor, it's rare we get to be in a room of friends and family, and it's great to be here with you guys. I have to admit, when I graduated college almost more than 20 years ago, that's scary, I was one of those skeptics. If I had met my current self back then, I would have been really skeptical about the idea that a for-profit investment can be used to make social progress. I felt that business people and people trying to make money were distracting themselves from the righteous and good work of making the world a better place. And so after I graduated college in the mid-1990s, I went back to South Africa where I had grown up. And I went to work for the Human Rights Commission of South Africa. And it was an amazing time to be there. The country had been liberated with our first free election in 1994. We had put together a new constitution in 1996 that on paper gave South Africans more rights than any other people had ever known. We had the right to housing, the right to education, the right to water. We were one of the first countries in the world to enshrine marriage equality as a constitutional right. And one day when we were at the commission, at the Human Rights Commission, we investigated a horrible incident that occurred in a rural part of South Africa. And in this incident, in this crime, a white farmer had kidnapped a black laborer from his farm, stripped him naked, painted him head to toe in toxic paint, and left him to die in the sun on the side of the road. And when that happened, I realized that that man had all the rights on paper, but he didn't have the economic power to realize those rights, because in that rural community, the white farmers and his friends who committed that murder controlled the land, they controlled the jobs, they controlled the stores where people had to go to buy things to sustain themselves. They controlled the buses and the trucks that allowed people to move around. And it really taught me that whatever my view of greedy capitalists, I had to learn how the business world worked if I was going to be helpful to address injustices like the one in that community or elsewhere in South Africa and around the world. So I came back to the US and I got a degree in development economics. And then I went to McKinsey, where the consulting firm, where I sought to learn how the business world thinks and talks. At least that's what I told the recruiter. What I didn't say is that I had to get my wedding paid for, and their signing bonus was going to help make that happen. But that wasn't so compelling. So I said I wanted to learn how the business world thinks and talks. And what I found in the business world, and McKinsey was an amazing window into the highest end of the for-profit world, what I found there astounded me. And what astounded me was not that people were greedy or mean. And in fact, most of the people I worked with were very gracious and good people. But what astounded me was just the vast amount of resources that were in play in that world. And I don't just mean the financial resources, although the trillions of dollars blew me away. The amount of resources of people, the millions, hundreds of millions of people who spend every day working hard, being creative, working together in interesting ways, coming up with new products, the resources of talent and time that was being applied to helping make money. And I almost felt like what I had encountered in this window into the for-profit world, having spent my previous life in the nonprofit world and government, what I found was like a vast lake of fresh, clean, beautiful water that was bottomless in its depth and that stretched beyond the horizon and that had so much activity involved and was motivating people and getting them excited to work in different ways. And yet the top of that lake was still and inert. And there wasn't motion that was getting that water from where it was, all those resources where they were, to where they could be used to solve problems and be productive. And that water was not getting to the thirsty shores like that rural community that I had encountered in South Africa. And so when we started the impact investing movement in its current form 10 years ago, we really were setting out to create the conditions in which that water could flow. That's what impact investing is about. It's about the simple idea that all those resources of capital and talent in the for-profit world can be productively employed to solve social problems. And I suspect that many of you share that view. When we created the impact investing movement and we coined that phrase, we were not the first people to have that idea. There had been decades where people had been making investments in microfinance in order to improve people's livelihoods. People had been making investments in affordable housing, in education, in healthcare, in the green investment movement. But what we did by coining that phrase, impact investing, was create the conditions in which everyone could come together and realize that they actually weren't part of one of those small industries or subsectors, but they were part of a bigger movement, a movement to create real momentum and to flow in that great lake of resources to get it where it needs to go. And I think you, by being here, are signaling that you are part of that movement too. So what I want to do tonight, just briefly, is share with you 3 rules that I've learned in the last decade of doing this work about what it takes to get the resources to start flowing into solving the social problems and environmental challenges that we face together. So here are the 3 rules. Rule number 1, lead from your seat. You do not have to wait to have the perfect job in impact investing in order to make a difference. Zanetta Koplowitz didn't wait. She was a 26-year-old junior professional working in the largest investment firm the world had ever known, BlackRock. When she decided with a group of people in the organization that that organization with all its vast wealth and potential could be put to work and harnessed for impact investing. And she was able to get that message up the chain through a set of activities and ultimately convince the chairman of BlackRock to start 6 years later an impact investing unit that is now operating. They have impact investing products that they're placing clients' capital into that's getting that water from the lake onto the shore. And the chairman himself this year put out a public letter saying that all large company CEOs should report to the public what they are doing to solve social and environmental problems. You can lead from your seat. The second rule is that you need to be tender-hearted, tough-minded, and tender-hearted. And tough-minded and tender-hearted comes from a sermon that Martin Luther King gave in Birmingham, Alabama in 1958, a sermon that my friend Donnell Baird from Block Power turned me on to. And what Dr. King said was if we want to be effective, we have to be tough-minded and tender-hearted. So what does it mean to be tough-minded? Being tough-minded means you reject easy answers and half-baked solutions. It is almost the birthright of impact investors to reject the easy answer and half-baked solution that says the purpose of investing is solely to make money, and the only way to solve social problems is through government or charity. We reject that as a half-baked solution and an easy answer. But now that impact investing has taken on, we have to guard ourselves against some other easy, half-baked answers and solutions that are coming up. You have to reject the idea that impact investing itself is easy. It's hard to make money. It's hard to solve social problems. We have certainly not made it any easier by combining the two. It's important that we reject the idea that all social problems can be solved by for-profit investments without at times having to trade off social return for financial return. And finally, it's very important as an impact investor to reject the idea that we as investors can somehow solve the world's problems without working as allies to government and to philanthropy. That's what it means to be tough-minded. Tenderheartedness is a little easier. Dr. King made that easier for us. He said that to be tenderhearted simply means to treat people as people. How many of you have worked in places where people were somehow something else? Where a person wasn't a person, they were an FTE on the expense line of the income statement. Or they were a part of your pro forma P&L where you said, well, this person will be converted into revenue through this product, and they're going to show up as the revenue line. Or suddenly a person was considered part of the customer acquisition targets that you have to meet so that your boss can get paid her bonus, or that the venture capitalists you're trying to attract will want to invest in your company. That's what it means to give up the idea that people need to be people, that all of this activity is supposed to be a means to uplifting people, and people are not a means to creating profit. That's what it means to be tenderhearted. Think about being tenderhearted and tough-minded. You might be surprised about who some of the most tough-minded investors are right now in America. You probably wouldn't guess that some of the most tough-minded, inspiring investors are the sisters religious. Yes, the nuns. I don't know if anyone here comes from a Catholic school. You might not be surprised to know that nuns are tough-minded and tender-hearted. But you probably would be surprised to know that it was the nuns who in the late 1970s and early 1980s helped pioneer the impact investing movement by being tough-minded enough to reject the easy answers and half-baked solutions that their investment advisors were giving them, telling them that it would be imprudent to invest their pension assets in a way that was consistent with their social mission. They said, we have this money, not a lot, but we have some money in our pensions, and we want to invest them in ways that help uplift people. They were told that that wasn't possible. And they were tender-hearted enough to realize that they could find investments that did uplift people. And so it was the nuns in some religious orders in the United States who were the early investors in a whole set of community development finance institutions that today are creating better schools, better healthcare, better jobs, and better homes for marginalized people across the country. You can be tough-minded and tender-hearted. And finally, rule number 3, you need to balance outrage and optimism. Think about your heroes. What do they have in common? For me, I think of my heroes like Dr. King, like Nelson Mandela, like my grandmother, Lydia Levine, and the one trait they share is that they all combine an outrage of injustice with an optimism that things will get better and that they can be agents in making that happen. That's what it means to combine outrage with optimism. Keisha Cash was outraged at the racial wealth gap in America. The average white family in America has more than $100,000 of wealth. The average black family in America, less than $2,000. In the city of Boston, the average white family has $247,000 of wealth, and the average black family, $8. Not $8,000, $8. That's what Keisha Cash was outraged about. But she was also optimistic that because venture capitalists were almost entirely investing in businesses started by white men from elite universities, there was an opportunity to address the racial wealth gap by addressing the inequality in the way ventures were being funded by starting an investment fund to invest in African-American entrepreneurs. That's what it means to combine outrage and optimism. There's certainly no lack of reasons to be outraged these days, whether it's outrage about the racial wealth gap, about the fact that racism seems to be increasingly accepted as part of how we operate, that sexism and patriarchy are becoming more and more entrenched instead of going the other way, that the climate change might become irreversible if it's not already, that inequality is growing, and that the influence of politics, of money on politics, is making that worse. Lots of reasons to be outraged. And if you can't be outraged by one of those facts or the many other things that are worthy of outrage right now, then I would argue that you are too complacent, too naive, or too blind to be helpful. And I'm sorry to be blunt. You've got to find your outrage. But if all you have is your outrage, you're not going to be able to help mobilize resources in a productive way because outrage alone can be paralytic. You've got to find your optimism. I am outraged at so much that's going on. I'm outraged by the fact that it seems to be increasingly acceptable to say that the only thing we are obliged to do is to take care of our own families and not everyone in our communities. I'm outraged in a country as rich as ours and a world as rich as ours, we allow for so much unnecessary suffering. I'm outraged by the fact that it seems increasingly we as a people are marked by our indifference. And I'm outraged by the fact that the people who control those amazing resources in that vast lake seem to be hoarding it. But I'm optimistic because my work at Nonprofit Finance Fund brings me into contact every single day with people in every community in this country who defy all of that. People who are committed and talented and passionate and are spending their energies in a system that is not setting them up to succeed, but are finding ways to live the ideal that we really are a community and that we can take care of everyone. And recently, I've been particularly inspired by one set of clients we have in something called the Food is Medicine movement. And this might sound a little esoteric, but their history is so inspiring. They are a movement born out of one of the most despairing moments in the recent history of this country, and that was the AIDS crisis of the 1980s. And the 1980s, when the AIDS crisis hit, In cities across the country, individuals said, we're not going to let our brothers die alone at home. They were being stigmatized and ostracized, not given medical care, and left to die alone. And so people started bringing food with a little bit of love to people who were dying of AIDS. And suddenly those individuals became groups, and those groups became organizations. And those organizations discovered that if you bring healthy meals to people with love, you actually can help them stay healthier in ways that the medical profession didn't even believe and didn't know how to do themselves. And not only can you help people get healthy, it turns out you can actually help people save money, because it costs less to expand the service than it does to treat people when they fall ill again and need to be hospitalized or treated by a doctor or given drugs. And so out of this moment of despair came this beautiful reality and this movement that says not only people with AIDS, but all people with chronic conditions can benefit from healthy meals delivered with love, and that ultimately we can actually save money doing it. And so those organizations are now at the forefront of incredible partnerships with health insurance systems and the government and hospitals, expanding this movement of food as medicine. And one of the leaders of that movement said to me, the best way we can honor our fallen brothers is to extend this beautiful thing that came out of their suffering to everyone who could benefit from it. How can you not be optimistic when you know that there are people like that working hard every single day in communities across this country? That's what keeps me optimistic. And I'm optimistic because I know all of you are here, and you share the same sense of what is possible. So the thing about the rules is that if a 26-year-old at the largest investment firm the world has ever known can lead from her seat and create ripples that ascend all the way to her chairman's office and change how that business is operating, then what's stopping you? And if nuns, who have far less in their retirement accounts than most of you are going to have, could be tough-minded enough to reject the conventional wisdom of their investment advisors, and tender-hearted enough to find investments that can make a difference by putting people first, then what's stopping you? And if Keisha Cash, an African-American woman without the connections or the family wealth to fall back on, could start something as risky as a venture capital fund investing in African-American entrepreneurs, and if those leaders of the AIDS community, suffering under the worst plague this country has known in 100 years, could not give themselves into despair, but find optimism to build something that has the potential to create ripples in our $3 trillion a year healthcare system, then what's stopping you? The thing about impact investing and the thing about all this work is that the challenges are vast and there's lots of reasons to be outraged, but you have the power to do something about it. Because as Robert Kennedy said, speaking more than 50 years ago to a group of young activists not dissimilar to this crowd, in South Africa, where this journey began for me, even tiny ripples of hope, when coming together from 1 million different centers of daring and energy, build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. So net impact community, let's go make some waves. Thank you.